Okay, we're continuing in the book of Isaiah. If you want to go and open up to chapter 3. It's a very large book, and sometimes it's daunting to try to take on all the different aspects of it, and it's such a long book, and trying to take each chapter, I mean, if we go at this rate, it'd be like 66 weeks, but that's okay. I'm resolved to do it that way because I think it's important for us to take the time to go do verse by verse. I just see so many nowadays Bible teachers that are superficially teaching, going through things. And so, even though I want to speed through it as well, because that's kind of my mode, I get hyperactive. I want us to not get buried, but at the same time, go through it meticulously. So the beginning of this book starts out with the condemnation that God is coming toward the people of Judah. Remember, the kingdom has divided. You have the 10 northern tribes have formed themselves into what they would call then Israel. You have the southern tribe of Judah, which also encompassed Benjamin, but you don't really hear from them anymore. They're there. So you have two kingdoms during this time. We're around 750 BC. So Israel is still, the 10 northern tribes as a nation are still there, but they're in trouble. God has sent the prophets. We've looked at many of those already, warning them, telling them, get your act together, judgment's coming. And the Syrians are starting to rise up as a superpower. So they're on the rise, and Habakkuk and other prophets are talking to them. Isaiah is in Jerusalem. Probably he's of a royal descendant. The thought is he's, of the king lineage. He has a lot of phrases and things and access. And as you go through the entirety of the book, if you were one of the Bible scholars that knew this, you'd say, this kid has probably started out as somebody who's very close to the throne. So he's very young when he starts. He's going to be very old when he finishes, into his later 70s, maybe even 80s, some have estimated. So we're at the beginning of this prophecy period, but it opens up with these visions. Now remember, a vision is not a dream. A dream is something where you're at night, you're asleep, and you wake up and you go, what was that I had? And you kind of have to think through it, and you go, well, there was a frog, and there was this thing going on, and you're kind of like, not real clear. Whereas a vision is, you're lucid. You could be sitting here right now and sit there, and it's like a very, very, very serious daydream. You're looking, and you literally think you're seeing the things in which he's describing. So they're more accurate, they're more prophetic and pointed, and so that's the difference between these. So these are a grouping of visions. Now, we don't know exactly when these happen sequentially. A lot of these books aren't written to where it starts out, he started prophesying at age 30, and this is his first vision, this is his second vision, and this is his third. That's not the way these are written, but it does start the tone of what the book's about. Very heavy. In the very first two chapters we saw, God calling nature as a witness against them, because nature's there. Nature sees everything we're doing, right? So it's kind of a cool picture of saying, calling on nature to come and testify. Witness, be my witness, God is saying, to what you have been doing. And what have they been doing? Well, everything that they seem that we always do. We cycle through these periods of righteousness, obedience, and following faithfully to where we start becoming self-reliant, we start becoming proudful, we start taking care of ourselves first, and in that, what happens is the people around the leadership starts to fall apart. The society falls apart. Different values are starting to creep in. Idol worship comes in. So these are all the things the first couple of chapters God has laid out, it's like a legal complaint in a court system that God is bringing forward and said, here are these charges that I have. Now, 3 is going to be, what's the consequences? And and sometimes you read these and you go, wow, this is just the same old stuff. Yeah, in a lot of ways it is, because we have the same habitual problem. We do the same things. But this is important, because what he says here in 3 lays out nothing new. In other words, what he's going to say is what God promised them when he brought them out of Egypt. What did God always tell them? Here's the law. Follow it. And if you follow it, oh man, you're going to be blessed beyond measure. You're not going to have to worry about having a standing army. You're not going to have to worry about disease or pestilence or none of that. No. Matter of fact, people of other nations are going to look at you and go, whoa, how can their economy be booming? Their crops never fail. They always have rain. Their health is wonderful. Their children are guarded. They have no enemies, and they have no standing army. What is about those people? They have that one God, Yahweh, and that's what God wanted. And God said, I'll bless you beyond your ability. But then he said in Deuteronomy as well, if you don't, and he gives them the consequences. So the very first part, the very first verses are describing what God's going to do. First, and this, you know what? We're talking nationally, but in a lot of ways, providentially, the way God works, this is similar. You know, why is God going to continue to support a rebellious sinner? Why would he continue to do that? You know? And that's what we see here. Even though we're talking nationally, there is some of this that we ought to take personally and look and think about. So let's go ahead and read 1 through 3. For behold, the Lord God of hosts is taking away from Jerusalem and Judah support and supply, all support of bread and all support of water, the mighty men and the soldier, the judge, the prophet, the diviner, and the elder, the captain of 50 and the man of rank, the counselor, the skillful magician, and the experts in charms. What he's talking about is, okay, that's a part of the promise. Remember, I said in Deuteronomy, he said, you're going to have lots of things. You're never going to suffer economically. You're going to have water. You're going to have food. You're going to have all this. God's saying, I'm pulling it back. If you look historically in the other prophets as well, and historically what would happen to these nations, especially Judah and Israel, is they would go through these times where God would put upon them different financial struggles, you know, to where they were suffering in their economy. Their crops would start to fail. And Israel, at one point, Israel was suffering so much that God said, you know what, I'm going to relent. You're suffering. And they came back and they started to prosper again. And God allowed that and let them prosper. And what'd they do? Did they go to God? No. They went right back to their old ways. So this is one of the things that God is fulfilling, what he had promised. You disobey me, you're going to suffer. One of the biggest ways you can hurt people is what? Take away their supply. Take away the food. Reduce it. You know, impact the water. And to us, we don't get it, but that's rainfall. So that's their crops as well. And then the next group sounds like it lists a bunch of people: mighty man, the soldier, the judge, the prophet, the diviner, the elder, the captain of 50, the counselor, the skillful magician, the expert in charms. When he lists all those people, what are they? Who are those overall? Those are people in charge. Those are people that should be making decisions and guiding them. What he's saying is, they're going to take away your leadership. Now, this is interesting because he didn't go and kill each one of them. He didn't go and go, captain of 50, you know, charmer, magician, you know, he didn't go and like kill them that way. What he did was he took away their ability. So what do you have when you have people in leadership like that? Man, that's the worst. You think, you know, I mean, a nation without wisdom, without good leaders. So he's taking away the core foundation that every person is going to need. They're going to need food. They're going to need water. Then he's going to take away those who could make good decision and wisdom. So there's going to be a famine as well. This is very similar, almost exactly what Amos, the prophet Amos, though, he went up north. Around the same timeline, too, actually, Isaiah, because we're within about 30 years from when the northern Israel kingdom is going to be taken off. And so Amos is up north. He's that goat herder from the wilderness who went and stood before the king of Israel and told them what they were doing, and they were actually prospering. They were during one of those times where they thought their king was invincible. Jeroboam II, they thought, wow, our king he's mighty, he's wonderful, and we're prospering. Amos went up there and said, no. And he gave them something so profound the way he said this, and this is what's going to happen to Israel as well, even though Isaiah isn't saying it specifically, as Amos says in 8:11. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread or thirst of water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. Now, what Isaiah said is they're going to have that famine of both, of water and that. But this is going to be different. There's going to be this type of a famine of leadership of God's word. And things are going to get really twisted because when they don't have that type of a wisdom, it's going to compound it. Who's going to guide them back? When a nation is repenting, they have to have people that want the nation to change. And that's the only way they can get back right with God, is having the right wisdom in those leadership roles to guide them back. And it's almost like God saying, no, I'm kind of done with all of you. And so not only am I going to hurt you physically with the water and food, but I'm also going to take that knowledge away. And it's not that it's not there. What it really is very similar to the description about Moses and the Pharaoh. When the Pharaoh's heart was hardened, it was from their own wickedness and evilness and hardness of heart that the word would have no effect. God was going to set it up in such a way. And that's a very frightening condition for a nation to ever get in. And I think that, many times nations aren't aware, but they're dangerously close when they start to walk away from God's values and start establishing their own. What you find is silly people trying to guide a nation. And then what happens? It gets worse and worse and worse. And so that's what is going to be happening to them. And it's frightening. So what he's talking about is incompetent leaders. And what happens when you have incompetent leadership in those roles? You have social chaos. I don't want to get political here, but, you've got to look at the correlation here. When you have that incompetency, and God is going to affect that, he says. So let's read 4-7. I will make boys their princes, and infants shall rule over them. And the people will oppress one another, every one his fellow, and every one his neighbor. The youth will be insolent to the elder, and the despised to the honorable. For a man will take hold of his brother in his house of his father, saying, you have a cloak, you shall be our leader. And this heap of ruins shall be under your rule. In that day he will speak out, saying, I will not be a healer. In my house there is neither bread nor cloak. You shall not make me the leader of your people. So it's kind of weird, huh? You listen to that, it's kind of like, what's going on? Well, first off, he's going to make boys the princes. You ever thought about when you had your children, if you were to just say, you know what, you're in charge. Man, I know my boys. It would have been chaos, right? But they thought they could run the place, right? My boys were confident that they were smarter than me and they could run the house. But that's what God's saying I'm going to do to this nation. I'm going to take the little boys and I'm going to put them in charge. And I'm going to take the infants and they're going to rule over them. What type of house would you have if the kids ran it? It'd be total chaos. It'd be total chaos. And it's going to become so desperate that in the own house, somebody's going to be grasping for a good leader. And so this is kind of a conversation, like when in the house, saying, hey, and the cloak is a symbol of prestige or a little bit of honor. So it's like, well, you have something. You have a cloak. You have some ability to lead. You lead us. You take over. Grab them and make them. It's like we're desperate. We're going to get you. We want you to be the leader. And what is he going to do? He's going to turn back and go, no. I will not be him. I'm suffering just like you guys are. And so I'm not going to do that. This is what Ecclesiastes, Solomon said, woe to you, O land, when your king is a child. And that's what he did to them. If you look at what happened, and the kings, a couple of them, they course corrected a lot better than the northern kingdom ever did. But they had some kings that were right on the edge. They were doing some very silly, foolish things. And you could almost see this being fulfilled, and that's what I love about that. Over in Hosea 8:9, they made kings, but not through me. They set up princes, but I knew it not. With silver and gold, they made idols for their own destruction. It's kind of that silly chaos of putting people in charge and allowing them to run the nation and not follow after God. So he's talked about what he's going to do to them economically, and then what he's going to do to them in their leadership, the government, the organization of what's supposed to be holding them together, guiding them, and why. The judgment is very powerful because he's going to talk about public and personal sin. They're different. And then it's important because what he's going to describe is things that were being sinfully done out in the open and accepted. Doesn't even bother them. You know, that's happened in America throughout history. There's been times in our history where there were things that we were doing that was immoral, and the people around just said, no big deal. And that's the public. So God is saying, I see everything. If you don't believe it's happening, ask the earth, ask the nature. It's watching, it's seeing this. But you are doing things out in the open. That's embarrassing. You know, secret, at least you got a little bit of, humility, a little bit of conscience where you're going, I'm not just going to go out and do it in front of everybody because I know it's not right. But when you're doing it publicly and it's being accepted and everybody's like, it doesn't matter what he does. That's okay, He's not hurting me. Doesn't bother me. So that's kind of where God's showing a very specific judgment is you're not only just personally sinning, but you're doing this as a nation and as a city. And so 8 through 11. For Jerusalem has stumbled, and Judah has fallen, because their speech and their deeds are against the Lord, defying his glorious presence. For the look on their faces bear witness against them. They proclaim their sin like Sodom. They don't hide it. Woe to them, for they have brought evil on themselves. Tell the righteous that it will be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked! It shall be ill for him, for what his hands have dealt out shall be done to him. So see that your face tells it all. You can't hide it. You're expressing everything. It's bearing a witness. And the very disgusting thing is he's saying it's the same level as Sodom and Gomorrah. And these are people that were pagans, that God brought a judgment on them for some of the things that they were doing. And he's saying, you're doing the same type of a sin that the city of Sodom was doing, and how'd that work out for them? No, they don't exist anymore. And you're not ashamed of it. But you sit and turn to your idols and stuff. And so you watch out. Whoa, it's coming upon. You have done this to yourselves. A lot of times people blame God. Or they'll say, well, why does God let bad things happen to good people? God doesn't do those things. The consequences of human behavior inflicts it on ourselves. And most of those human behaviors are sinful. And when they're sinful, they're harmful. It's not God doing any of it. And so there's a part of this, you are bringing this on yourself. Don't wag your head and act like this is a surprise, especially the Hebrews. The pagans, okay, the Gentiles, but no, what are you talking about? I mean, so God is very appalled at what they're doing. But I love the way he says, tell the righteous it shall be well with them. You notice, it's kind of like, I remember, because I was such a perfect young man, that whenever my brothers and us would get in trouble, and I didn't actually do it that time at least, you know how horrible it felt to stand there and listen to your father yelling at all three of the boys? And you're the one that you didn't do it? Let's just, and but you can't help but feel the wrath, right? I mean, and even though he could be saying, you're older, and brother, we're going to get you, they're going to be punished, and and the wrath is coming, and God, my dad's like talking to us, and I'm standing there, and maybe and I'm saying, no, I'm just playing. I didn't have anything to do with it, but I'll tell you what, it scared you to death. It would scare you. If you're sitting there, the very few that were following the best you could after God, and the nation's falling apart morally, but you're holding on, you can't help but think, why am I going to have to endure this too? So I love that the way God has not forgotten about those people that are righteous. He hasn't forgot about us, no matter how terrible it gets in this world. as long as we are doing our best to be humble before God and serve God, this message is for you. It's for us. Tell them it will be well with them. Now notice he says, though, you're going to eat the fruit of your deeds. In other words, since I've been using the mic for Wednesday nights and everything, batteries are going out faster. So I got to remember that, change them out faster. I have a schedule, but oh well, that's okay. We're back. So when we look at that, it's going to be something that is what you're doing, God sees. And therefore, because of your good works, what you're doing, God can see you. He's going to know that. And Paul says this in his opening book, comments in the book of Romans about the condition of the world and everything. He says, though they knew not God, talking about these people who should have known better, who practice such evil, deserve to die. They not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice. And that was a part of that public sin. That was a part. This in Romans, Paul is talking to both Jews and the Gentiles, but this is the same thing, is that the public sin is something. And this idea that somehow they could get away with it, that somehow they were going to be able to just, it's okay. God, he doesn't come down to correct us all the time. He's not always just rebuking us, so it must not be that bad. It doesn't mean you're getting away with it. And that's what Paul said as well in Galatians 6:7. He says, don't be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will also reap. So one of the things that I've said a lot lately about is this idea about those that are vulnerable in society, the people that are dependent upon others because of either physical, mental capabilities or other things, or the fact of even the people, the citizens, are very dependent upon their leaders and taking care of them and protecting them. And that's something you want to get God fired up. Don't provide for them. Don't take care of them. And this is what he says in 12 and 15. My people, infants are their oppressors. The women rule over them. O my people, your guides mislead you, and they have swallowed up the course of your paths. The Lord has taken his place to contend. He stands to judge the peoples. The Lord will enter into judgment, and the elders and the princes of the people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard, the spoil of the poor in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the face of the poor, declares the Lord God of hosts. You notice that very first part kind of jumps out at me where he says, the infants are the oppressors. You notice that what he talked about, who was going to be in charge? He turned the house over to the children, the infants, the young. They're going to be the ones. And this idea of those who should not be ruling are ruling. And they're guiding people away. And so that's why the Lord, in 13, he says, has taken his place. God is standing up. In 13. He stands now to bring that judgment on them. And he's going to bring it in. And so his complaint against them is where he says, it is you who have devoured the vineyard. You know, a lot of times the people who are responsible should be held accountable, should be humble enough to stand up and go, that's my fault. I made a bad call. I made a bad decision. What do when they're corrupt? They'll go, well, we need to do this. It's not my fault. They defer. They say it's something else. Well, the weather wasn't good. Trade was down. No. And God's saying, you cannot defend yourself for this. You're the ones who have done this. You're the ones who have oppressed the people whom you should be taking care of and helping. And this is what Micah 6:8 always just kind of jumps out at me. It's one of my favorite verses about when they're confused about what they should basically be doing, the fundamental thing that they're failing in, and this is what they're failing in. God has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. That's where they have failed the most here. And I'm not going to go through all of James, but we know James chapter 5. One of the things that people who have the financial and the assets and ability to help others and then hold it and don't, God knows that, and it really bothers him. And that's one of the things that in James, he warns Christians, talking to Christians, He said, behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you have kept back by fraud, crying out against you, the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. Oh, man. Remember what I told you? You want to get the Lord very angry? Harm those that can't protect themselves. And that's here, and this is New Testament. And so, the very people that you have hired, you're holding back. You're not practicing fair labor. So a lot of times when people talk about slavery, they talk about all these old ideas, the Old Testament and how workforce and stuff like that. This shows you, no, God expected them to pay a fair wage. It wasn't like we kind of imagined that you just, whatever they threw at you, that's what you did, and you went out and you worked. No, God still expected, if you're making a good profit, you take care of the people. You help them. That's what he's kind of getting at. And because of this pride, it's going to cause a fall. And that's what he points out. But he's being a little more specific because there seems to be one of the challenges that's going on in the society is there's these women who have rose up and started to take on a lot more of a influence and a detrimental one. I'm not saying that women's influence is detrimental, okay? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that this is what's happening here. The northern kingdom, Israel, same thing. Matter of fact, Amos calls them the cows of Bashan. He calls them cows because of what they have done in their extravagant life, their opulence and the things that they're doing. And so this is kind of the same thing. He's talking to Judah in 16:19. The Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with outstretched necks, glancing wantonly with their eyes, mincing along as they go, twinkling with their feet. Therefore, the Lord will strike with a scab of the heads of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will lay bare their secret parts. In that day, the Lord will take away the finery of the anklets and the headbands and the crescents and the pendants and the bracelets and the scars. And then I'm going to keep reading 20 through 24. The headdresses, the armlets, the sashes, the perfume boxes, the amulets, the signet ring, the nose rings, the festival robes, the mantles, the cloaks, the handbags, the mirrors, the linen garments, the turbans, the veils. Instead of perfume, there will be rottenness. Instead of a belt, a rope. Instead of a well-set hair, baldness. Instead of a rich robe, a skirt of sackcloth, and branding instead of beauty. Look at that list. That's quite a wardrobe, isn't it? I don't know, what is it, the reality show, Real Housewives of fill in the blank? Whew. I can't stand the thought that they even exist, those shows. And it just even little clips of them, the opulence, the arrogance that they have. They got the Housewives of New York, I think Housewives of Hollywood, the Housewives. I think there's like 3 of those shows, and they just have this, it almost reminded me. I mean, look at all the things that they're using, and yet what are the average people, how are they living? They're struggling. And so one of the things that I thought was really cool is the way that he said that strike with a scab the heads of the daughters of Zion ties in with the baldness. So the beauty that they relied on, their gorgeous hair, and everything, it's going to be scabby. It's going to be bald. God is going to humiliate them, expose them. Now, this is kind of really a shadowing towards what Babylon does to them. And that's going to be over 100 and something years, but this is what the Babylonians did, shaving the heads, the humiliation, the stripping down, the violating the women. I mean, that is a horrific situation he's talking about. And instead of this beauty of makeup and everything, they got branded, literally, like a cow. You know, the Babylonians to mark the slave, burning, of branding. Would that not wake you up a little and think, wow? You'd think it would. You know, it's still a warning today about how we are adorn ourselves, and women as well. And men, I'm not just beating up on women, but here Timothy talks about this as a problem as Christians as well, when he says, likewise, also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold and pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women to profess godliness with good works. Now, some have taken this to the extreme and felt like women can't have makeup, women should not wear earrings, women should not dress nice at all. No. What is the thing? What does he say here? What is proper for women who profess godliness, for good works. If you are dressing up in your ego and you start to have that, and there are some women you can see, they spend more time thinking about all the wonderful ways they can make themselves look versus how much can I help you? So there's a difference. It's not that God's saying don't look nice, women. It's just that we can become so self-absorbed in our own appearance that we fail to think about what we should be. And I'll just go through it real quick, reference Peter here as well, talking about the same type of idea, that too often we get caught up on our clothes, our jewelry, and the things in this. And the last two verses here in the chapter, and then we'll wrap it up, is this final picture, which is already pretty rough, what he's talking about in this. He says in verse 25 and 26, he says, your men shall fall by the sword, and your mighty men in battle, and her gates shall lament and mourn. Empty she shall sit on the ground. Like after the battle's over and everything's done and the dust settles, the only thing you're going to have left is a place to just sit in the dirt. It's kind of like after a tornado hits the house and you walk outside and you're alive and you just sit down and everything's gone and you look around. It's kind of interesting because Jeremiah was prophesying when Judah was finally taken away. And this is who he's prophesying to, is to Judah. Listen to what Jeremiah says in the book of Lamentations 1:1. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She who was great among the nations, she who was a princess among the provinces, has become a slave. She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. And this is after. It's a fulfillment. And it's a devastating picture. It's not the only time that where Jerusalem has put themselves in a position to grieve God. When we think about in Luke 19:41, we see where as Jesus drew near and he saw the city, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. This is as he's approaching just before he's crucified and the way he's rejected. So that's chapter 3. Next week, we'll jump into chapter 4 if you're with us this evening, and we can help you in your relationship with him. If you have questions, by the way, about Isaiah as we're going through it, you can drop them in the YouTube comments, and they do come to me. Or questions, concerns, or comments, let us know. I'd love to interact with you about it. We're going to be in this for a while. But let's talk about how that we are living with God and how, before we depart here, that we take a moment to reevaluate what have we been doing, how have we been, how can this lesson be avoided in our personal lives so that God isn't speaking to us like that. Hopefully, if our nation or the church or wherever you're at is in a situation that is that way, hopefully you would be the one where God says, you know what, tell those that are righteous, that are serving, hold on, I know who you are. But that's for you to answer, and that's your heart, and that's between you and God. So if we can help you at all this evening in any way in your relationship with him, let us know while we stand and sing.